Welcome to the Nashville Current Podcast. I am your host, Ed Clay, and we have a very special guest, Darren Hobbs from the Nashville Recovery Center and Music City Interventions. Darren, how you doing today?
I'm good, Ed. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for coming on. I tell you, I was happy. Chastity's an old friend. We went to high school together, and she reached out to me, and I guess she had seen some of the things that I had been talking about with all the things that are going on with COVID and wondering about who's taking care of people that are suffering from addiction, who's taking care of people that are dealing with mental illness. And so she said, hey, I'd like you to talk to Darren, and thank you for coming by.
Yeah, man, and thank you for your concern. You know, we need all the help we can get out there. It's a conversation worth having that kind of gets pushed to the wayside because of the stigma, I feel like.
Yeah, I tell you, when this first thing went down, when COVID went down, my first thoughts were kind of looking into the future. Like, what are the unintended consequences that this shutdown is going to cause? First thought was people with mental illness are going to be suffering tremendously. People with addiction are going to be suffering tremendously. The tools that you guys give people are to, be around people. Don't isolate yourself. Get exercise, be out. And then for it to not even be really talked about in the public very much, in the news, it was shocking. So what have you seen? First of all, tell everybody about what you do and the businesses that you work with and that you work for. Sure. And what that mission here is in Nashville.
Sure. So Music City Interventions was the first company that my partner Ryan Kane and I started. I think we're turning 5 soon. And that business was driven by, he was sitting out a non-compete. I had just done a successful professional intervention, and he was interested in intervention. I was interested in small business. And so a few Red Bulls later, we had a website and an EIN, and we just took it from there. And that business is kind of molded back into, we got first into the sober living extended care business, and that led to the Nashville Recovery Center, where we have a sober living community that's anchored there. We offer clinical services there, but it's also open to the community.
Yeah, so let's talk about Nashville Recovery Center.
Sure.
Because it's like a sober lounge. You have events, you have some movies, fights, those type of things. Plus you have all your a bunch of meetings. How did that get started really, and give a breakdown of what that really is?
Sure. So it happened, I don't know, luck, coincidence, or the universe just kind of, I'd mentioned to him in passing that I thought we needed a barbell gym with some clinical space, so young drug addicts and alcoholics could have a place to get healthy all the way around. And a few weeks later, we were offered this warehouse that happened to be adjacent to our existing sober living. So the universe was kind of funny,
Right.
And we absolutely wanted it. It was it had been Global Motorsports Garage over off of Charlotte, and so we had some equipment to remove and some paint to throw up. But about 6 weeks later, we opened it and started installing. We started hosting different 12-step meetings.
And with the 12-step meetings, we were talking a little bit before. You said that you were having over 20 before COVID, and it's obviously they went down to probably 0 for a while, and now you're back up. What's that process been like with meeting cancellations due to specific restrictions?
Yeah, and so I guess the way to delineate it is each different fellowship, whether it be Alcoholics Anonymous, Heroin Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, each one of those meetings that we were hosting has their own business meeting that decides what's best for that meeting itself. And each one of those took it, had to take direction to cancel the meeting to keep everyone safe. So by late March, we went from 18 to 20 per week, different fellowships in and out of our building, to 0. And, our community that was on our campus, we could still provide Zoom meetings and speakers and video. But the community at large had kind of lost their connection.
Yeah, and there was a paper that went out that was talking about drug addicts coming back from Vietnam on heroin, and those that had families seemed to do better than those with no families. And the idea was the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety; the opposite of addiction is human connection. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if that's completely true. I believe it to largely be true, but if that is partly true. What is the impact of the physical distancing and the isolation to the community that you're serving?
I think if you and I both had a hammer, you almost hit my nail with the hammer. But I think addiction certainly thrives in isolation, right? Mm-hmm. While it may not be the total opposite, if I had to give a struggling young drug addict or alcoholic one thing, it would be human connection. That's where it starts for me. That's what I've seen be successful over time. To be able to plug someone in is the biggest gift, right? And you take away that human support, even a high five or a hug for somebody having a tough day, right? To be able to smile, right? And to share some space, have some coffee. Those simple things that I've previously taken for granted quite a bit. I realized about 2 weeks in, like, hey man, I'm missing my guys. I've got to be proactive now, and I'm FaceTiming old timers sitting down in Birmingham. I'm FaceTiming like my buddies and saying, hey man, I love you and I miss you. And that's not something I'm programmed to do.
Right.
But I think that's true for all of us that have kind of made it through this thing, is that we've learned to be more proactive about asking for what we need from our friends.
Yeah. What have you seen as far as relapses? Have you been seeing a higher rate of relapse because people are in that isolation?
I think so, and certainly we've seen a spike in overdose and even fatal overdose. We can't give away enough Narcan, right? There was a young man who had been a staple in a meeting over at the NRC who lost his connection and shortly after lost his life. And he'd been struggling but hanging on for quite a while. And the onset of COVID was what did him in.
Yeah, the mental effects that I think this whole COVID shutdown has had, not just because it's been on everybody, addict or not, but for someone who is plugged into a network and they're going to their meetings and they're doing good and they're being taught a specific system, and for them to watch that be cut off by, fear of dying of this disease, but without thought of what happens to them, that's got to be a mind screw as well for them. Because do people really care about me?
Right. And I had this conversation with concerned family members will call me as an interventionist and say, hey, we want to do something, but we're going to wait till COVID's over. And my response is typically, hey, addiction or alcoholism is going to kill your kid a lot quicker than COVID.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Just
that understanding, my God.
Right. And I've taken every precaution that I could through COVID. Masks, asking families I'm going to work with to do temperature checks and, get tested and all that good stuff. And what I've seen is that families, there was a new normal to adjust to, right? So there's this thing that we're just all terrified of. But then we remember that this person we love is dying and dying a little bit more every day.
Where's the lot? Like what you just said, it's striking to me that, drugs or alcohol are going to kill your kid a lot faster than COVID. I mean, if you look at the numbers, and they have these, single cases at the end of June, 5,800 plus cases under the age of 40 in Nashville, 0 deaths. If you look at the New York number, we just had the first death, my understanding, in Davidson County, a 30-year-old. But if you look at the New York numbers, they're about even with that of dying in a car accident, going to work every day, of dying of COVID under 40. And so all I've been asking for is some logic and common sense, because what you're saying, it seems so logical and so common sense, but it's right. Even when you said that, it's like, whoa, you're telling parents and families, like, look, this addiction's going to kill them a lot faster than COVID. It's like, almost like, no shit, Sherlock. But it's not that simple, of course.
Well, it honestly feels like showing a caveman fire for the first time. Like, oh, wait, you're right. Like, just because we have this thing doesn't negate the problem that existed before COVID.
Right.
And, but it does give families an opportunity to be complacent. And because of that stigma I mentioned, it gives families a chance to just say, okay, we'll get through this first.
Sure.
Right. And we'll put that on the back burner.
Well, and Davidson County this is in March, late March, early April. They had said that the suicide hotlines were up 800%. You were mentioning something in Knoxville. What was the numbers you were giving in Knoxville?
I could probably get them exactly, but I believe that what I read was there were 8 suicides over 48 hours in a particular weekend, which was an exorbitant amount of their annual total.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
In 48 hours, 8 suicides.
Yeah, and you think about that effect. You know, are they thinking about that when they make these rules and laws? Are they thinking about how it's going to affect everybody? Because they always say, "Oh, we're trying to save lives," right? Mm-hmm. And I believe that's what they are trying to do. Actually, I'm not going to attack their intention, but are they really thinking about that? Are they thinking about all this? It's just like, you know, going to war. You know, you have the blowback, the unintended consequences when you go to war. Mm-hmm. When you do things that have giant effects on society, you got to think about the blowback.
Right. And, you know, for example, the first Friday March, that's either the 12th or 13th, the first Friday of COVID is real, we're shutting everything down. I drove from Centennial Hospital all the way down Charlotte. Everything was closed, right? I tried to get a young man in the hospital for a psych hold. They didn't want him because of COVID, right? They made getting him in almost an impossible task. The only thing open between Centennial Hospital and driving all the way to my house by Loveless Cafe was Wendell Smith's liquor store. It's the only business that was open, right? Everything else was shut. So that tells you, you know, and I don't think it's a grand conspiracy to make Wendell any money, but that's where we're at, you know. I have no opinion on churches, but I wish that people would have the freedom to do what they want to do on Sundays. Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, CA meetings, HA meetings, all shut by mandate, but we can buy packaged whiskey.
Yeah, what does that say? So they're shut down. They're mandated,
right,
to not be open,
correct.
But the liquor stores are running free.
It sounds to me like, I mean, Joey Fusang could probably answer this question a little bit better than I could, but to me it just feels hypocritic, right? It feels like hypocrisy.
Yeah, looking at kind of the state of society and how afraid everybody is. They did a good job of selling fear when this whole thing went down. It was
Agreed.
like fear, fear, fear. We're going to scare you into reacting and into doing what we tell you to do. And at first, you know, the whole flattening the curve was to give the medical personnel, the hospitals, time to get the PPE, make sure they had the ventilators, make sure they have a backup plan.
Right.
Then it changed to, we're going to be doing this possibly until a vaccine, which seems insane to me. And you know, now the rates are no doubt going up. The people testing positive are no doubt going up, but you know, mortality is dropping significantly.
Well, especially because there's no way to count the asymptomatic cases.
Right.
That nobody knows they've got it, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So we're testing more. We're going to find more. We're going to grow the fear. More people are going to stay in this new normal, and got a lot more people working remotely. I mean, there's no cash. There's no cash at Kroger. There's no cash at the bank because people aren't spending money. It feels strange.
It's a weird time, and you know, one of the things about addicts, addicts are really smart. You know, like in many ways, like they catch on as they're going through it. Like, so whenever they hear those code words like new normal, and they hear the things like stay at home and safer at home, and you know, we're in this together, they know that, you know, it's a bunch of BS.
Well, an active alcoholic or drug addict, I'll tell you what, if I could, I'll tell you they're two big wants, right? They want to reserve the right to keep doing what they're doing, and they want to do it in somewhat anonymously, right? Mm-hmm. I get to stay home, cool. Nobody's going to be checking on me, cool. I don't have any accountability, cool. Right? And it's not cool. It's just a lack of accountability, a lack of personal connection. These guys and girls that were tenuously holding on to a shred of hope no longer have hope, right? They've got nowhere to go.
Yeah, and you take away the hope. It's scary. And you take away the hope, and you just kind of wonder, like, why aren't they thinking about it? Why isn't this being talked about at the mayor's press conference every single week? Hey, you matter. Talk to the people that are being affected by this the most, because I don't think, we've had 150 or so COVID deaths in Davidson County. That's not that many. We might see more. We probably won't see that many more if they can keep COVID away from people that are 55, 65 plus.
Right.
You could probably keep the mortality way, way down. But they're not talking about, all they're talking about is the cases going up and how people aren't social distancing and how people aren't doing that. It's like they forgot about everybody else.
In that everybody else, our friends in Memphis had an enormous spike in overdoses over the first bit of COVID. From late March to early May, they did their entire previous year, I think. And that may be a little overstated, but overdose is happening because relapse is happening, right?
Well, the first statistics that I was looking at was the expectation based off of the unemployment. There's a lot of studies that match unemployment with mortality. If people are unemployed, mortality goes up over the next 5 years tremendously. And they were talking about within 12 months, or if you added the numbers in 12 months with the unemployment where they were, you'd have double to triple the suicide rate. You'd have double to triple the drug overdose deaths. Mm-hmm. So you'd go from 45,000 suicides a year to, let's say, 90 to 120, 130,000. Mm-hmm. You go from about 45,000 drug overdose deaths a year to 90 to 120, 30,000. So just right there, that increase alone is probably more than the coronavirus deaths. And it's in a demographic that's a lot younger, that's probably not as close to that. 44%, by the way, of COVID deaths as of a couple weeks ago, nationwide, were in nursing homes.
Right.
So it's like, to me, there's not a whole lot of common sense being used here.
Yeah, and I mean, we can talk about those numbers are staggering, right? But, and I won't mention their names on the podcast, but I personally know four people who were healthy and thriving pre-COVID, cut off from their community, and are now in the ground. They're dead, right? Families are grieving. Families are lost. These are real people, and I'm just a small representation of everything else that's going on in the world. I'm a small domino that knows 4 deaths, and maybe even more, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is that people, particularly young in the process of getting recovery under their feet, are losing their shot, right? Their resources are gone.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some things that people can do now, because hopefully this will bring some light to somewhat of a dark situation right now for the AA and NA community, for the addiction centers, for people that are suffering, the addicts that are suffering and mental illness. What can people do to support this group right now? How can they be a part of change?
I think the biggest thing that everybody can do, whether someone has personal knowledge of recovery, addiction, or mental health, is to talk about it just like we talk about cancer, right? Mm-hmm. If our general public could talk as openly about addiction and depression and anxiety and PTSD and bipolar, right, and mood disorders as they did about someone with leukemia, like, we wouldn't be talking about this today.
Sure.
Right? There's actually a really cool documentary I guess it just started filming, about the stigma around addiction, and how if we can get by the stigma, if we can erase the stigma, we can actually become more effective in treating addiction.
Let's talk about that, that stigma. I mean, because, I don't look at addicts any different personally, of course. I've had my own experience. I was telling you earlier, 2007, 2008, I tore my LCL, PCL, meniscus. The doctors, we had team doctors, they got me on prescription pain pills. I was training professional fighters at the time. Right. And I was on them for about 2 years. And went to stop one day, went through withdrawal. Did that multiple times over a 6-month period, went to see a therapist. And I said, hey, I feel like I'm completely functional running my companies, but I'd rather have a clear brain than a foggy brain. I remember telling him the exact same thing.
Right.
And he said, Google ibogaine. It supposedly stopped all opiate withdrawal, reset the brain to predictive state within 36 hours. All these things I read, and I was very skeptical. Took a plane to Mexico City. After watching a couple documentaries, took a plane to Mexico City, took a bus 2 hours south, did ibogaine in somebody's bedroom, was home. 72 hours later, never had a withdrawal, never had a craving, never done a pill again. Now, I learned later my story was unique. People really need treatment after that. Ibogaine is like an addiction interrupter. It blocks that opiate withdrawal. And we've seen a lot of patients over the years that have I've never not seen it work on short-lasting opiate withdrawal. I've seen a lot of people relapse, most people relapse even, but I would be lying if I said I haven't seen hundreds of people not experience any withdrawal. And so I say that because I'm passionate about addiction. Through those years, you meet so many addicts. I met so many heroin addicts, OxyContin addicts, and those type of things. And to see them come out and fresh and then really need something like an NA immediately, or maybe even go to a rehab immediately afterwards. And it touched me, obviously. You have a passion for helping those people. And to see them now, just kind of pushed to the side and not who's taking care, like you're taking care of them. Thank you for taking care of them. But like, we've got to get to a point where we can talk about this openly. I don't look at addicts as anything less or more than anybody. They're people that are suffering from a disease. Right. That's what it comes down to.
And the disease model, I think when you, and I get pushback from time to time when I'm talking to a new family of mine or maybe someone entering our program, but if you can believe the disease model, and I do, let's take two brothers. They're twins. They're 22 years old. On their 23rd birthday, their names are Jimmy and Johnny. Jimmy is diagnosed with leukemia. At 23, it's found out that Johnny has got a crippling heroin addiction, right? Leukemia brother is going to get sympathy. He's going to get cards. His church is going to have a drive. Mom and dad are going to wait on him hand and foot. And the other kid is going to get sent to treatment, right? One, we've got compassion, understanding for, even if he doesn't want to take his meds one day, or he doesn't want to go check in with his doc. He's not taking part in his treatment plan. The kid that doesn't want to take part in his treatment plan that's got a heroin addiction is going to be doing objectionable things. He's going to be harder to love, right? He might steal something. He might write a check or two. He might, be dishonest in another way, right? But we can talk about leukemia Johnny, in that Johnny doesn't want to go to his doctor's appointment today, right? He's lost hope, right? But Jimmy, who's lost hope as a heroin addict, we're not going to talk about that, right? We're just going to hush that up. And I think that's the difference. If we can get by the stigma, because mental health and substance abuse, they're ugly, man.
Yeah.
It's just the fact of it that we stop talking about it. It's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah, I guess a lot of it, from my experience too, is because it seems like they're making a personal choice, and to some level they are.
You're right.
But that's I guess the difference between leukemia and that specifically. But because to me there's a balance though. Understanding it's a disease, but holding somebody accountable.
But right? I think you're right. You hit the nail on the head. I skipped through ages 17 to 22 for him when he was experimenting with drugs, and at some point lost the power of choice. And that's basically what the disease model says. At some point, this guy loses the power of choice, and he goes into full-blown addiction. Right? Sure. And so that's where we lose some folks, right? Well, that was a choice he made to stick that needle in his arm. Right?
Sure.
And that's true. I think at first, for any alcoholic or drug addict, there was some choice, right? There was time to back off that cliff. But for guys like me, I'm a full-blown alcoholic and cocaine addict. I never stood in the mirror at age 6, 7, 8 when you were going to be an MMA guy, right? I never said, "Hey, I hope I can lose all my shit." Excuse my language. I hope I can lose all my stuff, hurt all my family, and lie to all my friends when I grow up, right? But that's what I did based on the I narrowed my choices because I felt like I had no other choice but to stay high. And my life got dark, and it gets dark for a lot of people out there really quick. And it does not feel in the moment like a choice.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't feel like, in the moment as a choice. And, I guess the hard part for the families is seeing the relapses and, because it feels to them like it's a choice, even though they might even believe in the disease model, but it feels like this person is doing this, even though they know how bad it's going to hurt me. They still, even though, so there's always that balance.
Right.
And, most people haven't been through it. So this is their first experience, probably,
right,
of going through having a loved one, a family member that is suffering, and so it makes it complicated. And with the stigma, though, especially the rest of society, what family members might be going through it is one thing, but not just because that's a personal thing, right? They're going through this personal experience with their loved one, and they feel like they keep doing this, and maybe they're doing it on purpose, even if I don't believe that. But the average person, where the stigma is, that's what I don't understand. From the outside, it is a lot easier for us to look at it as a disease because we're not personally attached to it per se,
right?
And be okay with it, like show compassion, show love, treat it like another person suffering from another disease, I guess.
Right, and the AMA defines it as a chronic brain disease, right? If the brain trust at the AMA says it's a chronic brain disease, I could wrap my mind around that.
Sure.
Right? And it could be a little bit geographically for us because we're in the South, we're in the Bible Belt. Addiction is long, and alcoholism is long thought to be a character moral failing, right? There must be something wrong with him. There must be something wrong with her. And the science behind it is that that's not true. There can be a lot of drivers for someone who ends up as an alcoholic or an addict or both. There's a genetic predisposition that's out there. There's accumulated life experiences. There's environment. There's traumas. We grow up in this society where it's John Wayne, right? Where you get shot with an arrow, you break that thing off, you throw it off, and you keep trucking. And trauma for any person could be, I didn't like when I got, the picking order for kickball in the 3rd grade, where I got picked on, all the way up to, I survived a plane crash and my family didn't, right? All of that can be defined as trauma. In the clinical world, they call that big T, little t. So the little t would be, the smaller nicks and cuts. The big T stuff would be the more defining moments in somebody's life. But all of that can lead someone to addiction, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's so many things. And, what about the different models? Because right now you have like the AANA model, which seems to be, well, it's been around for a long time, varying levels of success. Is there room for another model that can, that can maybe find some commonalities, things that are alike, some compromise in there to be more inclusive per se?
I think so. And inclusivity for us is a big word. It's on the biggest wall we got in the biggest letters we could get our printer to use. Radical inclusivity. For us, we want all comers at the Nashville Recovery Center to feel welcomed, whether they're on some sort of MAT, meaning a Suboxone or a methadone, and blending abstinence into their life, or they're a lifelong abstinence person and they're the cranky old person that shames MAT. We want those guys to be able to sit down and find commonality. So a new method, I think the recipe I would give to anybody is, let's get them good clinical care. Let's get them in good psychiatric care. Let's find what their brains need over time. Let's get them emotional balance. Let's learn how to eat some real food and get some nutrition in our bodies. Let's learn how to exercise. And we don't need anybody to be a swimsuit model or a men's health model.
Sure.
But we want to start treating our bodies like the opposite of the dumpster we've treated them as right? Just to have some respect, and it's this snowball that we can build back together and roll back up the hill.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because I think that when we close off from possibility, that's when we just get stuck, right? And I have friends that go through the program, and I'm very, very open-minded. I think that AA and NA are some of the greatest things for a lot of people. I think it's maybe not for others. And I think that, people have, like, if one thing doesn't work, it doesn't mean that the AANA is bad.
It means it didn't work for that person.
It didn't work for that person. We got to find, but looking at different possibilities down the road. One thing that may work for one person might not work for this person. Well, how do we, figure out, a really holistic approach? You're talking about a lot of holistic approach: nutrition, psychology, psychiatry,
right?
All of the things and the meetings. But it does seem that there's just from my perspective, there's just a couple models, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I would like to see more possibility in there. And maybe it is black and white for most people, but at the same time, I think that turns some people off and maybe creates more of a stigma for addiction.
And it may. I think that the biggest thing that a lot of the older, more seasoned guys from the most established 12-step communities would even tell you that the manuals of those 12-step communities say we don't have a monopoly on recovery. There is no one guaranteed route, right? And I think that's certainly true for me. 12-step recovery opened the gate for me to get sober and gave me principles to hit and a design for life. But then I got in, and y'all forgive me for this, but I joined a CrossFit gym. And I realized that exercise was good for me. I always wanted to have that connection and belonging, and be one of those guys that was accepted. And that happened for me there in a gym. Then I figured out a couple years later that I didn't like sweating, so I started powerlifting, right? But along the way, I learned how to eat, and I learned how to sleep, and I learned discipline, and I learned self-respect. And along the way, I connected with my fellow man. And if I could give, we could give, if we're cooking, if we've got a recipe and we're just throwing things in the pot for let's say, young man in recovery, I'd love to get him some sleep hygiene. I'd love to get him on a repeated schedule. I'd love to get him eating some real food. I'd love to get him in a workout regimen. I don't care if it's walking for 10, 20 minutes a day to start. Just something to start that investment in self. And then I want to get him in front of some people, right? I want to get him in front of some people that have some commonality with him.
Sure.
And I think that's the Trojan horse around meetings, is that you think you're going just to talk about what's in this book, but what happens is you get to know people, you get vulnerable, and you find connection.
Yeah, well, the power of vulnerability. I mean, Brene Brown, I don't know if you saw her TED Talk on it, but it's powerful, obviously. Power of vulnerability.
Yeah.
But,
by the way, the last thing I thought we'd talk about tonight is Brene Brown, but man, man.
It's okay, man. It's, hey, we're both, I guess, alpha dudes, but, there's nothing wrong. That's it. It's a conversation, right?
Right.
I mean, so yeah, being vulnerable with people, telling them your story. I've told my story of, what I dealt with the opiate addiction from fighting. I got arrested when I was 20 years old. I was facing 15 years in prison. That was a very interesting dynamic in my life. Ended up getting an 8-year sentence with 8 months to serve. You have those vulnerable moments of just telling who you are, but the more that you're open about those things, the more you don't hold on to those things. Brene Brown also talks about shame. And a lot of these people are carrying a lot of people carry so much shame. They're like, nobody could love me because of these things that I've done. And it's completely, this is not true.
Right. And when we share, we live that, I think, when she talks about toxic shame, right? This is the thing that defines me and you can't understand, right?
Right.
You didn't know before I got here, but I did. I probably 3 years total, but I got a year day for day and then 12 on paper for some drug charges, right? In that, I thought that defined me. That's who I am, right?
Sure.
I'm a convict. And lo and behold, I don't have a monopoly on that shame, right? It doesn't make me unique at all. It doesn't make you unique at all. But it is part of my story. It's just like it is for you.
Sure.
And at the time, I was really sheepish about telling that. And sharing that because I thought I had, my number across my forehead.
Sure.
And that's the end of my story. And,
right.
And the more we can share, and somebody looks back at you and goes, "Oh, cool, me too," or cool, man, my brother did the same thing. But we come to find out that it's not that taboo, right?
Right.
We haven't fallen off a cliff.
No, it was interesting because when I got out, there's a crazy story getting there, or how this writer showed up from the Nashville scene. But I had already opened my gym. It was one of the riskiest things that I really did, because whenever I got arrested, let's say it was 3 weeks after my 20th birthday, my attorney said, hey, you can let this ruin your life, or you can move forward like this didn't happen, and you can make some changes. And Mike Flanagan was my attorney, and I haven't talked to him in years, but it was, some powerful advice to a kid that, just made a mistake and was facing a lot of time. And so in April of that year, I'd called a friend. I'd said, hey, can I borrow $20,000? Dan Lambert. Thank you, Dan. And he sent me the money from Florida. He owns American Top Team now. $20,000 check. I never had so much money in my life. Oh my God, I got $20,000 to open my martial arts gym. And we did that, and Gameness, the clothing line. We had a $5,000 loan for that. So, so I opened the gym and the clothing line in April/May. My sentencing hearing was the first week of May. So I could have just gone in. I was facing 8 years. I had a sentencing hearing. The judge was going to sentence me. And I went in, and it was dramatic going back and forth. And the DA, I was on the stand, and he said, you're acting like you're a victim. I said, well, if that's how I'm showing up, that's not my intention, because if anybody's a victim, it's my parents, who raised me way better than this, and they're facing their son going to prison now for 8 years.
Right.
And we had a recess, and the DA offered me 3 years in between. Said, hey, well, we're going to 3 years, and which I should have taken, right? 8 years to 3 years, I would have served a year maybe. And all I could think of was, no matter what the judge did, if he gave me jail time, I was going to appeal it, and that would give me time to open my businesses. So I turned down the 3 years to go face an 8-year sentence. So I basically, I would have had a maximum of 3 years probation. After I went in, I would have had probably 2 years. But now I'm facing 8 years, and the judge is sentencing me. And so he gave me 8 months to serve, 8 years probation, 500 hours of community service a year for 8 years, which is basically 5 40-hour work weeks a year for 8 years of community service.
Right.
And I appealed it, and the judge couldn't believe it, because he had just given me a very fair sentence. But he didn't understand that I was opening my businesses. So then when we lost the appeal, we appealed it to the Supreme Court. And that gave me time to get everything up and running and start my businesses. But when I got out of jail, a couple years after after the whole process, served my time, my gym was open, and there was a writer from the Nashville scene that was there, and I'd done meditations. This is a crazy story. I'd done meditations on. There was a book called The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, and I said, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot if it works. There's no good books in jail except this. And so I'm doing these exercises every day, 2 or 3 hours a day, visualizing. I had a friend on the cover of the Nashville scene back in the day. I was like, I'm going to see if this thing works. Visualizing being on the cover of the Nashville scene. And I get out, and there is the writer sitting at my desk it might have been the day that I got out at Nashville Mixed Martial Arts. And I say that because I still had that shame. I'm like, oh, he doesn't know exactly what I just went through. And it wasn't very public that I'd gone in. And he kindly asked me about it. He said, hey, I'm not looking to, but did you just, I told him that. And so he published it in it was a good article. I was on the cover of the Nashville scene and told my story and mentioned it. And that fear of the toxic shame you're talking about, I was a kid, 22 years old by this time, it went away. Right. And I thank the Nashville scene for that one, because the writer just happened. His name was Matt Pulley. He was just cool. He showed me. He didn't even know. He was showing me. I was a kid that, hey, this isn't. I don't look down on you for this happening to you. But I just made that story up in my head, and then I just talked about it all the time, and people embraced it. And I think that would help a lot of people, that are going through this addiction or toxic shame.
Yeah, I think that. By taking the guesswork out of it and just naming, whether it's a pattern in life or a mental health issue or even addiction, if I name it, I take its power away, right? If I name it, I can get into solution on it. You know, once I name it, I can ask for accountability, right? And I can start doing the homework, just like you did. Like, hey man, I named this. You know, I made a mistake. 20 years old, I paid for it, and that's what I did. And now this is what I'm doing now.
Well, yeah, and there's got to be redemption in this world. People love a story of redemption, you know, that they come back and, you know, you've been knocked down and out, and, you know, you're like, you know what, I'm not going to let this define me.
Right.
I'm going to make something even better of it. They don't think that we can do these awesome things and make a difference in the world. You know, they don't think that you can open up the recovery center and you can, you know, be doing all the things that you're doing, helping all the people with the sober living houses that you're doing, all of those things, and you're doing it.
Right. And I think for all of us like that consider themselves to be in some angle of what we say is the helping business, whether it's from the meditation side or from counseling and emotional health or substance abuse or mental health, good psychiatrist. You know, I think all of us, I know it's certainly true for me and my partner Ryan, we get it. I mean, it's so much fun to go to work, right? Because this stuff is authentic with me. I am, you know, I see a lot of commonality in lots of the stories that we come across every day, but I remember what it's like, right? And so for me, when if you didn't know, fear and lazy can look a lot alike for young men in recovery, right? So if a guy's slow, he doesn't want to get out of bed, doesn't want to take part of the day, he might not be lazy. He probably just worried his ass to death the night before and can't wake up in the morning because he's so fearful of the following day. So if I don't start the day, I don't have to worry, right? So it's like little twists like that those that have walked the path can understand and have some compassion for, right? And so when we get to a stopping point with a guy and it's like, hey man, you know, and we want to be players, coaches. Hey, help me understand what's going on with you when you do A, B, or C. Help me get to the bottom of this. What's going on for you when, right? And really take that kind, compassionate route, kind of more Brené. But if we can ask questions instead of making statements to these people that are struggling, you know, it's authentic that we care.
Sure.
Right? We want to help them get in a solution.
Yeah, and they trust you when you ask the right questions. You know, they realize, like, oh, wait, how does he even know to ask that question?
Right.
You know, but it is different than telling people. It's kind of like right now with the whole mask thing. I've been wearing a mask traveling for a long time, but when people tell me wear a mask, it's like, you know, hey, you know, I'm wearing my mask. I mean, I wear my mask inside, going to the grocery store, going to the gas stations, etc. You're not going to catch me wearing a mask jogging down the street in the sun. My thing, sorry, you know. But that said, you know, the shame of put your mask on, or if you just ask kindly, hey, you know, would you mind wearing a mask? It's, you know, it's that type of thing that it actually reminds me of what you're saying.
Yeah, I innocently, and I'm over the mask. I'm emotionally over wearing a mask. I comply because I don't want to take for granted how anybody else feels or
Sure.
take anyone's health for granted. But I innocently, actually, at lunch today, walked in without a mask, and I was met with, like, you know, like I just walked in and called somebody's, I don't know, like I just insulted somebody's mom or grandmother,
Right.
And it was an innocent mistake. I had it in my pocket, backed up, and you know, the world was right again. But I think we just, to me, it feels like as a society, we've gotten too precious with a lot of this stuff.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of righteousness with it.
That's a good word for it.
A lot of righteousness, and I always talk to JP. Hears this from me all the time, but like, you know, I wear a mask a lot on airplanes. I was in an airport 93 days last year, so you know, a lot of traveling.
Right.
And when this whole thing started, and when I was in Japan, I always noticed people wearing masks. I'm like, this is interesting. Maybe there's something probably to it. I was in Japan a couple times. People are always wearing masks for years. And I'm like, okay. So I thought it just made sense, kind of like if you're coughing, cover. And there was some reasonable science on it, but not really much for the public. And so I was wearing masks, and the same Karens on the left that are attacking now, put your mask on, they were making fun of me over wearing a mask. Science doesn't show that. You're just wasting. I mean, I get on airplanes, and people were just like attacking me. Before, nobody cared if I had a mask on an airplane. But after, from March March 1st-ish till the end of April, when masks didn't work, I mean, I would be getting crushed.
Right.
Then, of course, they changed their tune, and but it's gotten to the point where it's hard for people to understand that you can have. I can be for a mask, but don't like people telling me to wear the mask. And I remember those same people that were telling me not to wear a mask, kind of how stupid I was when I was wearing a mask, are the same ones that are screaming at everybody for not wearing a mask.
Right. It's it can be kind of confusing, right? I stand for. I'm good with BLM, right? I think that it is an obligation for all of us to stand up and say, hey man, everybody's life doesn't matter until everyone's life truly matters.
Sure.
Right? I think that is on all of our plates, right? But we got some mixed messaging. Hey, especially from our mayor. Hey, don't have gatherings over 20. By the way, I'm hosting a protest tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Everybody come. Make sure you wear a mask. To me, that's a little confusing.
Yeah.
I know our great mayor's got a lot of fans out there, and he's, there's recall attempts and all that good stuff. But I wish we would pick one road and go down it together.
Well,
as far as safety and masks and phase 1 or phase 5.
A plan.
And emotionally, I'm still not over the SEC basketball tournament getting canceled. That's my Christmas.
I know. Well, lots getting canceled. But on to the same point. I support the Black Lives Matter protests as well. I didn't like the fact that, and actually, Dr. Jahanger, the head of the coronavirus task force here, he corrected me and said that the mayor had supported the previous protests as well, not the BLM, but he supported both of the protests. And I said, okay, that's good. That's at least he's consistent.
Right.
But there was mixed messaging, and I actually really liked the mayor after the tornado, and actually I supported him before getting elected. I liked him after the tornado. I thought he showed good leadership. But throughout this, to me, he's become an intellectual and almost like a college professor that isn't connecting. There's not a lot of connection with him. It's a righteousness. This is what we're doing. And, I don't see a lot of passion. He reads from the teleprompter. It's just the same stuff that I don't know who's writing his stuff, but there's a lot of contradictions in there. Mm-hmm. There is a political agenda. Whether he can recognize it or not, somebody behind him is very politically motivated. I'm not sure it's him, by the way, but it seems like there is a major political agenda behind this. Mm-hmm. And so, I've been disappointed in the media for not calling him out. I mean, I supported the protests, but of course, protests are likely to spread coronavirus. Of course. I mean, there's nothing wrong. It's just like saying, I support the bars being open, mm-hmm. But of course the people are going to spread coronavirus in bars. Why can't you say they're going to spread them in the protests and bars? It became political. Well, oh no, if you say that coronavirus was spread because of the protests, then you don't think, no. I'm just speaking some common sense here. Why can't we have this conversation? And
there's a lot of the word righteous, I think, is perfect. So if you go to a protest, COVID doesn't exist or won't spread. And if you doubt either of those, you are likely racist. Right. That's the messaging that's out there. And that's just for me, that's just not true.
Right.
I've got a baby boy. I am concerned at all costs for my child's well-being and safety, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't do anything to drag that virus home. However, we've still got to go to the store. We got to buy eggs. We got to buy red meat, whatever. we have to be able to go on with our daily lives, right? And I think you talked about the fallout earlier, the overall economic fallout of this thing, and we talked about trauma. Coronavirus, how many mortgages have been forfeited? How many careers have been either put on hold or thrown down the toilet? And how many young children have been affected? How many routines have been affected? Untold. Like the fallout from this thing, there's not yet an official clinical designation for post-COVID stress disorder.
Sure.
It'll be out by August, right?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt in my mind that there will be more death from the poverty the coronavirus causes
Amen.
Than the coronavirus. I've been saying that for 3 months. I believe that is going to be 110% true. People don't understand the risk of life, right? There's about 99,000 deaths a year from hospital-acquired infections. You go to a hospital, you get an infection and die. Are you worried about going into a hospital every time dying, like because you're going to get a hospital-acquired infection? Is that your number one concern? Hospitals are very concerned with it, but I mean, people don't know that. 250,000 to 450,000 deaths by medical errors a year. We'll see if we get to 250 with COVID. But you know, it doesn't seem to me that society understands that there's a lot of risk just living a normal life every day. And, you know, if you're younger, you really have a much less risk of dying of COVID than a lot of other things.
Right.
But by saying that, all of a sudden, you're not taking it serious. No, I'm taking it very serious. I haven't seen my mom, I've seen her 3 times. I've sat 6 feet apart outside. She's got pre-existing conditions. I'm worried for her. But I'm being responsible as a responsible adult. And if they would have just told us the numbers up front, like saying, hey, it's not that. Why is it so bad to say, you know what? If you're under 40, you don't have that much to worry about. Something bad could still happen. But what's the concern is the older generation. You got to make sure that you stay away from them.
Right.
That to me is a logical conversation that it would build trust because you're actually telling the truth that it's not that dangerous.
And I think that's where the UK was. I think that's where they were to start this whole thing. When we became concerned, that was their first directive was if you're over 50 or over 55, maybe stay in the house.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and now, I mean, if that would have happened, across the board, and they would have put as much energy into stay at home as in, I've been saying stay away, hashtag stay away from older people, stay away. If you're younger, going to the bars, if you're doing that, stay away. We might have burned through this thing already.
I agree.
I mean, there's that possibility, and people can say, oh, you're it's easy to say, not being in charge, and fair enough, it is, but somebody has to have vision and do something because, this is crazy. Nashville is going to be bankrupt. I mean, we're at that point where it's going to be bankrupt. You're going to see, right now nationwide, yesterday there was a story, 32% of people didn't pay their mortgages in July. I mean, you know what happens when that happens and when that pops.
Right.
You close down all of the bars. You close down Opryland Hotel, you have all these things closed, and you suck the life out of the city, trying to protect people, when now it comes down to in my opinion, it comes down to personal responsibility. We need to tell people the truth about the data. It's really deadly for this population. It's not so deadly for this population. We've got to make sure you separate. Right. We've got to make sure you separate. And nobody's doing it.
Well, the personal accountability is plug personal accountability into most issues, right? If we all act like the world doesn't spin right here and just do our part, this whole thing's over with, right?
Right. Wow.
You just touched on something for me though, that the spin-off anxiety, depression, this stuff is years away, right?
Oh, yeah,
years and years away that you can't even forecast it. It's like there's not a number big enough. So what can we do today is, number one, it's personal accountability. Stay away. Wear your mask. Do sanitize your hard surfaces. Wash your hands. Put some vitamins in your body. Stop. Cut the drive-through out. Eat some real food. Get some sunshine. Right. And when coronavirus is over, keep doing that stuff.
Right.
You know, the things that lead to healthy life, most of us just don't do. And you're right, Nashville is broke.
Oh, yeah.
And that's scary, man. We have a beautiful city with beautiful people.
We do. We absolutely do.
And you know, our schools have long been broke and done. Most of them don't do that great of a job. Some of them are passable, but I would love for this to make an entire 360 and reset everything for Nashville. Right? Let's get some fresh ideas all the way around town.
Well, that's fresh ideas. I mean, that's where we're at.
We don't have any dissenting opinions here.
No, it's and like I said, I supported the mayor when he ran for mayor this time. Thought he did great with the tornado, but watching those press conferences and seeing the people not represented in the media. I mean, these are softball questions that they're being asked, and they say, "Oh, we asked tough questions." But there's no follow-up questions. I can't tell if they're actually in the room, if they're on the phone. So maybe it's by design they can't do the follow-ups.
Right.
But they were asking, are you testing for, or were you asking if people attended the protest that tested positive? And they said something like, yeah, we started that. Well, when? Because you're telling people the protest didn't have anything to do with any of the spread, which, I don't think it had a giant amount, honestly. But why not acknowledge, oh, yeah, it had this much impact on the spread? Instead, it's like, oh, we weren't even asking the question. So what do you do then? You're just building distrust, with society. And if they don't see that right now, they say this isn't it's partisan. You're building distrust with the society. Somebody like me who, I can see both sides very clearly. I'm like, no, I get where they're all coming from. But I'm seeing this partisanship. You have the right, you have Trump, who is, in many ways the divider in chief from my perspective. You had the left media that's been pumping fear and scaring the hell out of people over this whole coronavirus mess. And it's created this giant divide where we're much further apart as a community, as a country, as a state than we've ever been. And people are so ignorant to even seeing that they're doing it.
Right.
Our metro government says they're not playing partisan politics. Yes, you are. If you can't see it, take a step back. Look at 10,000 feet and see the partisanship going on here. See the left agenda that you're really, really pushing. See the divide. Because just by you saying, oh, this isn't partisan, you're missing a lot of it. You're not even acknowledging the other side.
Well, I think you're right. And take it transactionally, if you just jump on your social media today, look at the petty squabbles that are going on.
It's horrible.
If you and I have dissenting opinions, or I ask you a question on social media, and I'm just investigating your point. You got five other people turning this into a shootout, right? Mm-hmm. And somebody's getting called a bigot and somebody's getting called a liberal, right?
Right.
When we've removed all gray area, you're either right or you're left, with no room to get to know the other side. No,
yeah, exactly. And thinking freely. We need free thinking. We don't need to, say, oh, well, if you're putting a mask on, you're a liberal, and if you don't have a mask on, you're a Republican. That's ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, the idea that the masks are so politicized, that is ridiculous.
Right.
And think about this. The left needs to take responsibility because, as well as the right, but the left needs to take responsibility in the sense that they shamed people for wearing masks before. Mm-hmm. You had Fauci coming out saying that masks don't work; they're no good. Then the America's top doctor, top infectious disease expert, says, well, we didn't want a rush on them, so he acknowledged lying to the public. Mm-hmm. But it has become so. The left that were attacking people like me for wearing a mask like I said, are now shaming others for not wearing a mask. Right. And they're just as much to blame for all of this as anybody. I don't like to say blame, responsible as anyone is. And we need to realize that we all are contributing to the hate, the division, when we really want the same thing, I think. We want to open things back up in a safe way.
Personal accountability, right? if we just stop bitching and take personal accountability for the small amount of things that we each can control, we'd have this under control.
Yeah, I strongly believe that.
Totally agree. It's a universal fix. But how do you get that across when there's so much fear being thrown around social media and the news, and you don't know? I mean, I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I don't know what's real. You know, it depends on how much news you have, how much time you have to watch the news today. That's what's real, because it's the last thing I heard. It's confusing, man.
I don't even watch it, man. I don't watch the news at all. I just look at data. I mean, that's, last 3 to 4 years of my life, actually longer than that, last 5 years of my life have been in research papers. When we launched United Cancer Centers, our chief medical officer is the former chief of infectious disease and immunogenetics for the National Institute of Health.
Okay.
Our chief scientific officer is the head of bioinformatics for the Pharma Foundation. I'm around scientists, talking to scientists, all the time in my life. I have an epidemiologist that works for us full time. And it kind of goes on and on. And I say that because I agreed with them saying, look at the data. You want to look at the data, like, let's follow the data. But that just became follow the data, without any real truth behind it, because they're following the data that fits their agenda.
Right, cherry picked.
But they're not really looking at the whole data. When we got a good data set in Nashville of 5,800 plus patients under the age of 40, nobody had died at the end of June. Like, we should be making decisions with the city, for the city, that take that into consideration. Agreed. And they're going to say, well, that one guy died at 30. Yeah, there's going to be more people that die. I'm not saying people aren't going to die, but you can't science doesn't like anecdotal cases unless this anecdotal case, this one person, is fitting their agenda. Exactly. So it's hypocritical on every side, and we've got to have somebody speaking some normalcy in this, or we're going to be shut down all the way through until there's a vaccine. Mm-hmm. And then there's going to be a big debate on the vaccine.
Right. Right. then the people who wanted masks won't want the vaccine because you can't tell me to put that in my body, right?
I know. Oh God.
I mean, it's like a dog chasing its tail, and I think that's just where it's where we're at. For guys like me that number one, I am a person in recovery from long-term recovery from alcohol and drugs, and two, I work in it, so that it's kind of a two-way thing. Like, number one, how can I get what I need to stay healthy? And two, while given the ever-changing rules about gatherings and meetings and all that good stuff, how can I do what I need to stay healthy? And two, how can my partner and I adjust and adapt our business as things move,
sure,
so that we can better serve our clients?
Absolutely.
And it's the rules have changed. I mean, they change daily for the first few weeks, as you know. I know you guys have been affected here.
Brutally.
Brutal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an ever changing set of circular hoops to jump through. It's been rough, man, for all of us in recovery. But it does feel like we've crossed a little bit of a hill with
Good.
Some meetings coming back open, and even at a quarter or half capacity.
Well, yeah, that's good to hear, and we're about out of time here, but I want to kind of, in closing, have you go into talk about what people that might be listening to this that are suffering from addiction or mental illness, what are some steps that they can do to make things better?
So if someone local is listening, our doors at the Nashville Recovery Center are open back to the public. We want to be your in-person Google. Show up, tell us what you need, right? Somebody can help you there. Outside of Nashville, there's a couple of apps out there. There's one called Meeting Guide. Wherever you are on this planet, if you plug in your location, it'll tell you what meetings are open and close to you. Those are a couple just easy wins that anybody can do. My personal cell phone is on our website. My partner's personal cell phone is on his website. Our entire team's phone numbers are available 24/7. We both work long hours. We're happy to direct people to resources.
Yeah, so a lot of people are asking, what can we do? So Nashville Recovery Center, call the number. He said his personal cell phone's on there. If you don't know what to do, I know that you've got some possible solutions for people. And you got to realize too, there's a lot of people who care about you. There's a lot of people out here that are thinking about you, even though it doesn't seem like it, maybe because we don't have as big of a voice as the mayor or the governor or things like that. But there are options. You don't have to suffer alone. And you can get on the path of that human connection. That's what you're about. It's interesting. We have a lot in common with what you're doing and beliefs. And I'd just like to thank you because it makes a difference. And, we need people making that difference right now in the world.
Hey man, Ed, thank you for having me on here. It's really cool to have an advocate from kind of outside the addiction space to speak up for all of us that struggle out here. And this is a cool podcast you have going on, and I'm thankful you have me on.
Right on. Well, thanks for being on, and thanks for listening to the Nashville Current Podcast.